Hello and welcome. So glad it's good to see everyone. Will you join us and stand as we worship today? And just want to say happy Thanksgiving, and hopefully it's just not our stomach is full today, but hopefully our heart is full. And it's He who fills us, who satisfies us. And so with that today, let's just worship Him. Let's just respond to His goodness, to His love. You're the only one who can. You're the only one. You're the only one who can. 'Cause there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Well, nothing is better than you.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. In all my days, I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God all my life. And all my life you have been faithful.
There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, oh, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His. And oh, how strange and divine, I can sing all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. The night is dark, but I am not forsaken, for by my side the Savior, He will stand. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need His power is displayed. To this I hold, my shepherd will defend me. Through the deepest valley He will lead. And oh, the night has been won, and I shall overcome, yet not I, but through Christ in me. No things I dread, I know I am forgiven. The future sure, the price it has been paid. For Jesus bled and suffered for my pardon, and He was raised to overthrow the grave. To this I hold, my sin has been defeated. Jesus now and ever is my peace. Oh, the chains are released, I can sing, I am free, and not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath, oh, I long to follow Jesus, for He has said that He will bring me home, and day by day I know He will renew me, until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, and all the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, and not I, but through Christ in me. To this I hold, to this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, and not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me.
worship team. You may be seated. Just a great reminder that it's not us that are doing the works. It's not us that are changing lives. It's Jesus Christ that's changing lives. Just want to welcome everyone here today, our guests. Thank you for coming, joining us, and also our New Life family as well, and those who are also joining online as well. So we just want to welcome everyone. Before we move to announcements, I just want to share a Bible verse with you guys. It's in Mark chapter 10, verse 46, and all the way to 42. Let me read this to you. 46. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man. Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. You know, this just past couple of months and just couple of weeks here, actually, there's been a lot of people who's been sick. And I know you guys probably know someone who's sick, or even your own family members. And I just got the news just 2 days ago that my brother, he got sick. He got really sick, and he just went to the hospital yesterday. But they just released him. And you know, when I heard this, my heart was so troubled. I'm like, man, why did this happen? But you know, if you read in the Word, it says Jesus had these things for a purpose. And even with these things, here in this story, the blind man came to Jesus. And when he approached Jesus, everybody knew he was blind. And everybody knew that his wish was to be healed, to see. But Jesus still asked him, why? Why did Jesus still come and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" The reason why Jesus still asked, because Jesus wants us to have that connection. Jesus could have just said, "Oh, yeah, he's blind. I'm just going to heal him. I got to move on." He didn't do that. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus allowed him to come to him and still ask, "What do you want me to do for you?" And when Jesus healed him, he just didn't heal him, but Jesus knew that healing this man's life is going to change. He has different responsibilities, a different pathway. And sometimes in our life, whether we are sick or we have a prayer, we want Jesus to help us. We want Jesus to heal us, but we just don't ask. And if we do ask, Jesus wants to listen to us. He wants to have that connection with us. He knows our heart. He knows that we want to be healed, but Jesus still wants that connection. He's still patient, and he still wants to listen to us. So I encourage you, if you have a sickness or you just have a prayer request, ask him, and he will respond to you. With that, Pastor's going to have a few announcements.
Thank you, Alfred. And that's who our God is. He's just a giving and wonderful God, but he wants to see if we have faith that he can give those things. So ask and it will be given to you. A few announcements for us. Actually, there's quite a few, so I'm going to kind of go through them so that it will be very clear. And so the Ironmen, they have a Secret Santa on Sunday, December 12th. And so if you haven't already signed up, do sign up for that. Lunch will be provided. It will be from around 12 to 4. And again, it's a Secret Santa, so if you could give maybe 3 ideas, general ideas of kind of what you want to kind of give the men that will be purchasing a gift for you, to kind of have an idea of what to give to you. So do sign up for that. It's out in the lobby. Next Sunday is our budget approval for 2022, and so Vince has already passed that out. If you don't have that, Vince, he'll get that out to you. But we're passing it out today so you can kind of review, look at it. If you have any questions, concerns, they can be addressed next Sunday. Next Sunday is Family Connection. And so please bring a dish, preferably prepackaged. And if you can't, the celebrations teams will do that for you. And so, but do bring a dish and join us afterwards. Today we're going to do a love offering for Chow and Pa. They're undergoing financial hardship due to COVID. Do pray for them as they're recovering. Chow is still in the hospital recovering. And so if you decide to give through check, just note it that it's for Chow and Pa. If you decide to give through Tithely, there is an option there for love offering, and you can give that way. And checks and cash can be given in the box, the giving box in the lobby as well. And so outside are free COVID tests. And so these tests are real simple. Just follow the instructions, and you'll find out in 15 minutes. There's 2 tests in each box. First come, first serve. Please only take 1 per family. And so maybe you're wondering, like, what do I do if I get sick or am I exposed to somebody? Obviously, you can take a test. It'll give you peace of mind as well. And these tests, you can find them at Walmart, at pharmacies. It's only $14 for this particular test. And so I want to encourage you, if you need that additional security, peace of mind, to go and do that. And so, but if you're sick or you have COVID symptoms, do please stay at home. And so until you get better, I believe the quarantine day is around 10 days, but if you want to kind of get out sooner, definitely you can get tested with that as well. But I also want to encourage you, do be informed about the vaccination and get yourself vaccinated, as it's probably the safest thing that you could probably do during this time. I know there are different views. It's very personal, political. There's all these kind of views. And so, and I have this stance. It's a biblical stance. And so it's from Romans chapter 13 that we should listen to our government whenever, governors and those in leaders, whenever possible. And so I have this statement is, at all times as Christians, we need to be good citizens, until being a good citizen means you're a bad Christian. Okay? And so if the government's telling you to do these things and it doesn't go against our faith, then we need to listen and obey. Okay? And lastly, our Christmas concert rehearsal. After service, it will be for both our children and youth. So children and youth, please stay with that. And then on Saturday, it'll be for our youth at 11 a.m. So at this time, we'll dismiss our children, our youth, and our Hmong-speaking adults. I don't know if you guys remember when COVID first came out, tests were like crazy expensive. People were paying like hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, to get these tests. And now it's like amazing. Like within a year, they're only like $14. Okay, and so, yeah. We continue our sermon series, Flipped Right, and that's to regain a right biblical perspective. Right? And we are on part 4, Discerning Rightly. You know, I remember hearing a story. It's a funny story. I probably told this before. But there was a particular guy who was looking for a job. He couldn't find a job. And so he came up with the idea to go and rent a gorilla suit because he had heard of a wanted ad in the zoo looking for a gorilla. So he rents the suit and he goes and he puts on such a good act that they hire him, right? And so he's out there in this gorilla place, and he's acting out, and everybody like thinks he's a real gorilla because he acts and performs like one. And after a while, it kind of gets boring, and he goes, you know what? I'm gonna kind of like spruce it up. I'm gonna kind of make it more exciting. How about you put me in a place where I'm like swinging from one side to the other, and put a lion in there. Right? And so they're like, whoa, that's pretty dangerous and risky. But hey, if you're okay with it, he goes, yeah, I'm okay with it. And so every day, he would do that performance. He would jump on this rope and he would swing across the other side where there's this man-eating lion at the bottom. And then one day he kind of gets cocky, right? And he just swings with one arm. And he's like waving, and he slips, and he falls into this pit with this lion. And he's like screaming and yelling, right? And he goes, "Help, get me out." And so people are actually more shocked that this gorilla's talking, right? Than that he fell with this man-eating lion. And this lion is like slowly kind of coming up on him and ready to kind of pounce on him. And it's kind of slower. So he goes, "Help, somebody help me. This lion's going to eat me," right? "I'm not a gorilla, I'm a man," right? And so the lion comes closer and closer, and the lion's like ready to eat him. And the lion goes, "Be quiet or you will get us both fired." The lion was an actor as well. He was portraying to be a lion. And so, but they played such convincing parts that nobody thought that they were people. Just like this man played a convincing gorilla and fooled many by his performance, there are false teachers that fool countless believers today. Jesus clearly warned of this danger before his return in Matthew chapter 24, verses 10 and 11. This is what Jesus says. "At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people." Jesus didn't say some false prophets. Jesus said many false prophets. And they're going to deceive many people as well, including Christians. I don't put a lot of stock into visions. And I really kind of see them very skeptically, right, whenever I hear of visions. But there was one particular vision I remember hearing about a man that really intrigued me. And he said that he had a vision of people, a couple lines, that were going to heaven. And he said some lines, people would just fall into these pits because somebody was digging these pits. And so the vision was this, that somebody was keeping these people from getting to heaven. And he said that he looked into the pit, and guess who was digging these pits? It was pastors. And I was like, when I first heard that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Are you tagging pastors here? And I thought about it, and I was like, man, biblically, they're the ones that should be leading and pointing people there. But yes, these false teachers can be doing the opposite and keeping people from heaven. How do we avoid being deceived? Today I want to share with you how to discern rightly so you can recognize false teachers so that you won't be deceived and be led away from the true biblical Jesus. And so, how do we avoid this from happening to us? Well, Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 to 20. Jesus tells us here that there are 3 indicators to help us recognize false teachers. Verse 13 to 14 is the first. Read with me. It says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Now, we already looked at this passage last week, but this actually connects with today's passage. That's why it's so important that we actually go over it. And so, the very first indicator of a false teacher is we need to look at the message, their message here. And so, if their message, again, this broad gate, right, and this wide road, and is referring to, I shared with you last time, that it's referring to many ways, that there are many ways to heaven. Well, Jesus says there's only a right way and a wrong way. And a wrong way means that there are many ways and that it's easy. But Jesus says that small is the gate and narrow is the road, and that the journey itself. Okay, so the gate is there's only one way, and that's through Jesus. And that journey
It's not easy, but it's a battle. Okay? That's what we learned last time. And so the message, again, if somebody is telling you that there are many ways to heaven, guess what? They're false teachers. If they're saying, like, you know what? All you need to do is pray a prayer, and you're saved, and you don't need to change your life, or you don't need to do anything else. Well, guess what? They're probably a false teacher. Because there's a cost to discipleship. Jesus says it's going to cost you everything to follow him. And so, the enemy is a whole lot smarter than we think or give him credit for. And so maybe you're thinking like, well, Pastor, I'm not going to listen to that stuff. I won't be deceived by those kind of things. When somebody's teaching many things, or maybe they're making it easy, yes. But again, the devil, he's a lot craftier than we think. And so he kind of changes things just subtly. And so maybe he won't say it's many ways, or he won't say it's easy, but he'll just make it a little bit different to kind of throw you off. And so he makes it a different gospel. Can you discern the differences? And so, why different gospels? Again, because believers can't easily discern those differences sometimes. And so, for example, I remember kind of growing up and hearing about the prosperity gospel, right? And it sounds so good, right? And the prosperity gospel is this: it's the belief that it is God's will for all believers to always be healthy, wealthy, and happy. And although that kind of sounds good, and he does promise us some material provision, that's not the priority as believers, you see. Nor is it our purpose to seek for wealth, health, and happiness all the time, see. And so it seems like that's a little bit easier to distinguish. But many Christians are unaware of this new danger that's found in the message of progressive Christianity. I've kind of shared a little bit about it before, but I'm going to kind of expound on it. Elisa Childers, she's a Christian blogger. She summarized progressive churches as this: they have a lower view of the Bible. So they don't really see the Bible as authoritative, right? They're like, well, it's just a book written by some people, and sometimes it has some good things, and sometimes it just has things that I can't identify or relate with, and so they don't listen to those things. Secondly, their feelings are emphasized over facts. And that's part of postmodernism, right? And that's part of relativism, right? It's like whatever you think is right, even though the facts say differently. And then essential Christian doctrines are open for interpretation. Things like the virgin birth or the resurrection. We're talking about core theological foundational truths and doctrines. They're saying like, what? I don't think the resurrection happened because there's no way to explain it. And the virgin birth, does that even make sense? You see? And here's the biggest indicator, right, of this progressive teaching is the heart of the gospel message shifts from sin and redemption to social justice. Social justice is the new gospel for progressive Christians. And so if you have your smartphones right now, I want you to just pull out your dictionary and to punch in or type in social justice and read it. Because a lot of Christians think social justice is biblical justice, right? But social justice in here, this is how the world understands it. Don't be confused. This is what it says. It says, fair treatment of all people in a society, including respect for the rights of minorities and equitable distribution of resources among members of a community. That's what social justice is. And when you initially read that, it sounds really good. But listen to what it says. Yes, fair treatment of all people in society. What kind of fair treatment? Well, it talks about respect for the rights of minorities. Oh, that sounds really good. Because I'm a minority. But how about others? You see how they're emphasizing just certain groups? Right? Jesus makes it very clear, love your neighbor as yourself. It's everyone. We need to respect everyone, not just one particular minority. What else is fair treatment here? Well, it talks about the distribution of resources among members of a community. That right there is communistic, right? Where it talks about if you have a certain amount of goods more than others, guess what? It should be redistributed to those who don't have it, and maybe they don't even deserve it. You see? And so that should actually scare you. And so social justice has really nothing to do with biblical justice. But yet the church is falling for it. What is the biblical justice? Well, the great commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. See? And so, the Bible warns us about receiving a different gospel. Listen to what Galatians chapter 1, verse 6 to 9 says. He says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. Paul was so far in saying, like, you know what? If I am preaching you a different gospel than the one that I share with you, even if an angel preaches a different gospel, let them be cursed. Why? Because it's leading them to hell. It's leading them to hell. So, what is the true biblical and historical gospel? You need to know it in order for you to discern the false gospels. Well, it's things that you already know, that salvation is found in Jesus Christ alone because of who he is and what he did. Don't forget that. That salvation is found in Jesus Christ alone because of who he is, being the Son of God, and what he did, dying on the cross. And if we put our faith and trust in God's provision, we receive complete forgiveness and the righteousness that saves from Jesus Christ. Okay. Point is this: you can tell a false teacher when they give you a different gospel message than from the biblical and historical one. Don't miss that. You can tell a false teacher when they give a different gospel message from the biblical and historical one. Let's look at the second indicator that Jesus gives to help us recognize false teachers, and it comes from verse 15. It says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. What's the second indicator? And that is their motives. Their motives. Jesus tells us two insightful and revealing things about false teachers here. He says, you won't be able to recognize them by their appearance, but you can recognize them by their motives. By their motives. And so, I remember attending an event once, and there was another pastor there, and he was asked to share. And he seemed like a typical pastor from afar. And as he was speaking, I could tell he was very gifted. He was a very charismatic type of pastor, and he was very gifted in public speaking. But as he began to share more, he kind of turned it into a self-promo thing. And he was kind of sharing about what God had done through him. And he says that if you want these things to happen to you, come and talk to me. I was like, okay. And so kind of showed where his motives were. How do we discern motive, though? How do we discern motive? And which ones should we consider as concerning or alarming when trying to recognize false teachers? And so motives can primarily be broken down into three categories. Okay? Self, others, and God. Okay? And if they're not a believer, then it's just pretty much self or others. And so, when you think about it, others may seem more honorable, right? And it is. But in regards to teachers, preachers, and pastors, it should always be in this order, with consideration to God first, others, then self. And it can't be any other order than that. Why? Because if the message is from God and the motive is not for God, the message will always be construed. It'll always be twisted. That's why the motive needs to be for God, because the message is from God, you see. For example, if my motive was to make you happy today, right? Because, hey, you know what? I want you to continue to come and I want you to continue to give, right? I would tell you only things you want to hear. I don't want to make you upset or to offend you, right? I wouldn't teach on the reality of hell. I wouldn't teach about God's judgment on sin or even about Christ's imminent return. I would only tell you things that would make you happy, that would make you like me, see? And sometimes I don't want to preach on those things, right? Because, I'm a human being. I have feelings too. I feel uncomfortable, and I feel like, man, they might not come back, or they might not like me. But again, I'm responsible to God because he's the one that's called me. As Paul says in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, it says this: am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And I take my calling seriously. And the reason why I'm not afraid to preach the truth is because, guess what? I fear God. He's going to hold me accountable one day. I love people too. But again, my allegiance is first and foremost to God. It's kind of like what evangelist and missionary Paul Washer shared once, that it's not that he doesn't fear men. He goes, hey, I fear people. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to offend people. But he says this. He says he fears God more. And that's why he doesn't ever water down the gospel. And so, how can we discern motive when we recognize, here it is, when we can't recognize them by their appearance? Well, the takeaway truth is this: their message is more about pleasing others and self rather than pleasing and honoring God. That's how you can tell motive. See, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3 tells us, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. It happened back then, it's happening today, and it continues to happen. People only want to hear what they like, what makes them happy, what entertains them. I was watching apologist Sean McDowell debate with a progressive pastor. Okay? And I have to say that this progressive pastor, he looked pretty cool. He was good looking. And a lot of the comments kind of showed it. Like, whoa, this guy looks really good, And who wouldn't like him? Appearance-wise, he looked like a great guy, right? And so, again, he's a pastor. But he's progressive, okay? And he's accepting of homosexuals and LGBTQ. And he was questioning the resurrection and all these kind of things. And this is a pastor, okay? And so... But as you listen to him, you realize that his goal or focus was more about pleasing people, you see. Yes, it's good that we're concerned about people. But as the pastor, as the teacher, your motive should be first and foremost about pleasing God, because then if it isn't, your message will always be construed. It'll always be twisted. And so he gave a message, guess what? To please people. And he teaches that. And so as I was listening to him, I said, well, that's his goal, his focus. It's not about God and honoring him. And that's why his messages cannot be trusted. Let's look at the third indicator that Jesus gives to help us recognize false teachers. And it comes from verses 16 to 20. It says, by their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. And so the third indicator is their manner or fruit, their manner. And when I say manner, I'm referring to the outward bearing, the things that you will eventually see. Jesus clearly tells that you may not recognize them by their appearance, but you will surely recognize them by their fruit, what they will eventually and inevitably produce. And so he uses a very powerful picture here to explain this. And he talks about fruit trees, right? And if it's a good tree, it's going to produce good fruit. For example, what was common during that time were fig trees. And so if it's a fig tree, it's going to produce figs. And so, however, if it's a bad tree, it's going to produce bad fruit. But this is the misconception that we sometimes get, that we're thinking like, well, if it's a fruit tree, it could produce bad fruit. Jesus is not talking about that analogy. Jesus is talking about something totally different. He's talking about not a fruit tree producing bad fruit, but he's talking about something totally different, like a thorn bush or a briar bush. And so Jesus was saying, like, there's no way that this thorn bush can produce good fruit. It only can produce briars and thorns, you see. And so it will never produce good fruit because it's a bad tree. It's a thorn bush. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 8 tells us what will happen to that kind of tree. He says, but land that produces thorns and thistles is worthless and is in danger of being cursed. In the end, it will be burned. And so the question that we need to ask is, what kind of fruit are we producing? It kind of shows what kind of tree we are, right? But again, here's the misconception. We must not be misled here to think that this is, as a preacher, as a teacher, as a pastor, right? To think that this is, the fruit is referring to the impact of the message or the ministry. And I want you to think about that. Oftentimes we think like the fruit is the impact of the message or the ministry. Like it's like maybe he's part of a growing church, or maybe because of the messages are so good, people are coming to faith. And yes, those are great and good indicators and things that are happening, but I believe that Jesus is actually referring to the fruit here is the life of the person, the life that this person lives. Because listen to Philippians chapter 1, verses 15 and 18. It says this, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this, I rejoice. What is Paul talking about there? Paul's in prison, and he's hearing word that there are a lot of evangelists and preachers and people maybe planting churches, right? And he hears that a lot of them are doing it out of wrong motives, selfish ambition, or for rivalry, man. I just want to outdo you, right? And of course, some are doing it for the right reasons, but Paul says, what does it matter? People are being saved. So what's the connection? The connection is that sometimes we can't tell good fruit just because of the impact of the message or the ministry. Because Jesus says a clear indicator is by the fruit. And so if we gauge it just by the impact of the ministry, maybe they got a huge church and people are coming there. right? But their message could be something that's not even biblical. Or they're impacting people's lives by what they're saying, because what they're saying people actually like hearing. It doesn't offend them. It makes them happy. It entertains them, you see? But Jesus says the real fruit that we need to be looking at to these preachers, pastors, these teachers, is their life. Is their life. It must be the life that this person lives that we need to be looking at. You know, there's probably no greater Christian apologist that I looked up to more than Ravi Zacharias. But after the world found out about his secret sexual sins, and this is after he had passed away, it devastated not only those he impacted, myself included, but an unbelieving world by giving them more reason to not believe in Christianity. You know, I think about it, I think that Ravi Zacharias was a false teacher? You know, I think about it and I have to say yes and no. Knowing this, that his message was true. There was nothing that I could tell that was a different gospel message. Many people came to faith. But yes, he was a false teacher in this, that countless people were led astray when they found out how he truly lived. And that's what false teachers do. They lead people astray. That's why it's essential that we truly know the lives of those that we rely on for the Word of God. And I'm not using this as a virtue signaling for myself, and I want you to examine my messages. I want you to examine my motives. And for sure, I want you to examine my manner, my lifestyle. Pastor Tim Keller shared once how a woman decided to leave her church for his. And he asked her, so why? And this is what she said. She said, you know what? My previous pastor was a great speaker. He was a great preacher. But the reason why I'm here is because he didn't love his wife. And I couldn't stay in the church where there was a pastor and shepherd that didn't love his wife. And I was like, well, I better, I was like, when I just heard that, Tim Keller was like, yeah, I better go home and make sure I love my wife and she doesn't kind of say anything, and the same for myself. All right? And so how do we recognize if they are false teachers? Look at their lives, because their life tells more clearly than any message that they could ever give. You know, I remember talking to a member once how she never could go against her pastor. And I was like, never? And she goes, no. And I was like, and I kind of knew the pastor as well, and I knew the pastor wasn't always the best speaker. And he taught doctrinally sound things, but I was just curious as to her statement. And I said, so why? Why is it that you can never go against your pastor? And she said this. She says, because of how he loves and takes care of his family. It had nothing to do with his preaching, shepherding, or teaching. It was just simply because he loved his wife and he took care of his kids and loved them as a father and husband. And she says that just by his lifestyle, she knew that his messages were true as well. In conclusion, Jesus gives us 3 indicators to help us recognize false teachers. One is their message. We can tell that they are false teachers if they preach a different gospel message than the biblical and historical one. But we need to know what the biblical and historical one is first in order to discern the false ones. I hope you know what the true gospel is. Salvation is found in Jesus Christ alone because of who he is and what he did. The second indicator is their motives. We can tell that they are false teachers if their motive is anything but honoring and pleasing God most. Yes, as a pastor, I care for you. I love you deeply. But I love God and fear God more. He's called me into this position. And one day he's going to hold me accountable. And third and lastly, it's their manner. We can tell that they are false teachers by the lives that they live. In closing, in Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 11, it says this. It says, they dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. And this is referring to the false prophets and teachers and priests of Jeremiah's time. And they were giving the false message of peace, ignoring the seriousness of sin and the spiritual condition of God's people. Sadly, I have to say that this is predominantly the same message that is being given today. It speaks just to our happiness. They want to keep the peace by pleasing people. It doesn't speak out on sin or how serious sin is or how weak and worldly the church has become. Church, we belong to Christ, and he's coming back for his bride. How will he find you? Will you be living in selfishness and sin, or faithfully serving and seeking him? I hope it's the latter. What's the takeaway from all of this? Well, I hope that you will examine for yourself that if this is the place that there is a true teacher, a faithful teacher, and not a false teacher, that you will be committed to the church. Because this is the community that will help you grow in your faith and get you home. And if it's not, you've learned for yourself how to discern rightly if there is a false teacher here, for you to find someone that does teach the truth and be committed to that church and community. Pray with me. Heavenly Father, you've given pastors, preachers, teachers to build up the church through your word. But Lord, we know that the enemy knows that this is the avenue to mislead so many. This is how that they can be deceived. It's by these teachers. And we learned today, Lord, that if we want to avoid this, that we need to know that these are the indicators to recognize false teachers. It's in their message. If they're teaching a different gospel message than from the biblical historical one, Lord, they're false teachers. If their motive is anything but honoring and pleasing you most, Lord, we need to be careful and concerned. And if their manner, their lifestyle says differently, Lord, maybe they're the false teachers that we need to avoid. Lord, help us to see that you have given these shepherds, these teachers, these pastors for our good, and that the words that they speak are not just their words, but words from you, if they are true. Help us to listen and obey, for we are your sheep, needing your guidance. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. We pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand to worship.
What gift of grace is Jesus, my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to Him. And oh, how strange and divine, I can sing all this kind, yet not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath, I long to follow Jesus, for He has said that He will bring me home. And day by day, oh, I know He will renew me until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, and all the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. We sing, to this I hold, to this I hold. Oh, my hope is only Jesus, and all the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Thank you for joining us. God bless you.